Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Awakening Educator. My name is Megan Sweet, and as always, I'm with my lovely co host,
Susan Andrian.
Susan. Sometimes we introduce each other, sometimes we don't.
Yeah.
And today we have the great pleasure of talking with Cara Tuttle Bell. The topic of our conversation is going to be all around sexual consent, how to support kids and young adults to understand how to set boundaries and understand what those are in the first place. For anybody who works with middle and high school kids in particular and college age kids, this is a really hot topic and something that the students have been bringing forward. So I'm super excited to pick your brain, Cara, and hear about the work that you do. Could you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us who you are, what you've been up to.
Sure. And thank you so much for having me. I'm Cara Tuttle Bell, and I've worked in higher education on college campuses for the last almost 20 years in some different campuses. And what I do all day is address sexual harassment and sexual assault, other forms of intimate partner violence on college campus. So I run the prevention program and supervise victim advocates currently at Vanderbilt University. I'm also on the board of a nonprofit organization, Stop Sexual Assault in Schools, and that is focused on K through 12 schools. And it's family run, and it grown out of an incident that impacted the family, and then they found out that they were not alone, and it's just grown and grown. And a few years ago, I connected with them and have been involved since then because, well, I'm very happy to work on a college campus. That is my choice and preferred audience. I know that all of this training and education really needs to start long before they get to the college campus. And so, what's really encouraging is that we have seen a huge increase in awareness in recent years and some federal action on this, even in the K through 12 environment, but a lot more understanding and activism coming from the students themselves and families that I find really encouraging.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here to talk about this, we never have topics that are kids can't listen to, but I will say parents and families out there, we will be talking about sex and consent, so just know that. But I so appreciate your point that it needs to start at a young age. And I remember, I was a middle school teacher, and I would, this time was primarily males acting sexually on females, but like I would see them like push a girl up against the locker and grab them, and the girls oftentimes thought that that was a compliment, and they took it as a compliment that they were getting this kind of attention. And I always tried to figure out the ways to help them understand, and it's really any gender, any identity, understand that actually your body is your choice, and when someone comes into that space, it's not okay. But it's not often normalized that way. And then, as you said, as you get older, and the hormones get stronger and all the other things happen, and you get normalized to a certain kind of behavior, then you don't even realize sometimes how much you actually are infringing on someone else's space and their boundaries. So I'm super grateful that you're here and excited to have this conversation,
Thank you.
for sure. So how do you, well, hmm, how do you start out the conversation? I mean, I guess that's my wondering, like, as we start to have these discussions with kids in school settings, how do we, because as soon as we say this, parents will also freak out and be afraid that we're having these conversations. So how do you start to enter into that conversation at a school?
The recommendations for starting it really early, and I mean like kindergarten, first, second,
Mm-hmm.
third grade, are
Mm-hmm.
to talk about consent and boundaries. I mean, maybe you don't even use the word consent and boundaries, but it doesn't have to be sexual, conversation at that age. No, and I don't know anyone who's suggesting that. Although we would want people to understand that people have bodies have functions, and normalize that experience for a variety of reasons. But you can have these conversations about your body belonging to yourself, just what you were saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
And about recognizing the limits of the space that you can control, recognizing and honoring that of others, whether that is about the body, space around the body, or someone's possessions. You can talk about asking, before before touching. You can talk about honoring and respecting someone's no. Um, this should come up, like, when we're trying to talk to people about sharing and hugging and an affection, and sometimes we make people hug people that they don't want to hug, and we're missing some warning signs there that they're trying to tell us. So it early on, it's really about understanding yes and no, and being able to acknowledge hurt and harm, or that someone's making you uncomfortable, and feeling like there's room to say that. And I think with good intentions, often we're raising children in other directions, right? To show affection for people who maybe they don't feel safe with, maybe who are harming them, to be seen and not heard. And so then they feel unable to tell anyone what's happening to them, or to say no, or to resist. And when those messages are the dominant messages over the lifespan or up through adolescence, then I don't think we can be surprised when people do get pushed and don't know what to do. Especially if you add the layer, which you mentioned, of telling people, oh, that means he likes you, and we're normalizing kind of boys will be boys type behavior, then a lot of that can be interpreted as misguided affection, and we're avoiding direct, clear, healthy communication styles and trying to read between the lines of behavior that can sometimes be very violent.
So, I mean, I think that this is really important. And as my role, like I'm a behavioral health for our, behavioral health for a district. And we created a curriculum starting, as you said, in kindergarten around boundaries and healthy touch, and then moving in specifically around consent and sexual behaviors as kids get up in 4th and 5th grade, and then even more complex as it goes up through to high school in partnership with the health team. And as
Susan, I'm just going to interrupt you really quick. Your microphone keeps hitting your shirt, so I just want you to,
Oh,
there
you know what? It's thank you. It's and it shouldn't be on this microphone. It should be on the other microphone. So I might need to switch it. But
what you're saying is important, but you just keep muffling yourself. So I just wanted to let you know.
Thank you.
There you go.
And it's making me realize I'm in my headphone microphone and not my microphone, which I'm going to cut all this out when we edit. So we're our department, our team, in partnership with the health department. We have a behavioral health and then health and wellness. We created a curriculum that starts in kindergarten and is developmentally matched to the kids up through their senior year. But as a mental health person, one of the primary, most common things that I get called out for at school sites is inappropriate touch between children, sexual exploration between children, curiosity, and sort of this complexity around consent and curiosity and the way in which exploration. And I've also heard a lot of conversations evolving now around how are we teaching young people about consent and clear communication while still helping them navigate what's already really difficult when you're coming into your sexual prime, and that can be so difficult to really verbalize or to navigate sexual relationships as you're not feeling confident in your body, or the whole thing feels awkward. And sort of how do we help our young people for each of these developmental stages in developmentally appropriate ways navigate yes, we want to make sure we're respecting people's boundaries, we're being really clear, and you don't have to be afraid completely so how do we help them feel comfortable and confident and boundary, which is super hard.
It is super hard. I mean, I'm right where you are. So I actually love the question because a lot of parents have expectations for your prevention educators to teach something in a very clear way, in a bright line rule type of way. And my question I would pose back is that how you learned about consent and sexuality? Is that how you're currently navigating it? Because so often it's not, right? I mean, I know I'm a Gen Xer, I'm mid-40s. I had abysmal to no sex ed when I was coming up in K through 12. It certainly didn't tell me what to say, how to say yes or no, to understand bodies other than mine, to resist unwanted touch. I mean, I got scare tactic sex ed of like zoomed in pictures of STIs. And then it was like, just don't do it, you know? And so it was scary in a way, but it wasn't, I didn't feel equipped to navigate this phase of life. So, the challenge is for parents to let the educators and the teams, right, have complex conversations that acknowledge that sometimes this is not simple, and it's I can't give you a math problem. In the college setting, people are like, how many beers can you drink? And I'm like, that's not how this works. I can't say 3 is fine and 4 you're not. It varies by body to body. It varies from day to day. It varies if you've slept, if you've eaten, if you've had medication. Right. So I get the hope, and don't we all wish this had an easy solution? But we're talking about humans and human communication and human nature. And it's messy in so many ways. And this one's fraught with vulnerability and sometimes shame and lack of information. And so, if the words are used at all, are not coming out clearly in all settings. And I really don't want to shut down curiosity and exploration. So it's not a desire to over respond, but where so much of this gets stopped really is that people want to review the curriculum, review, a scenario, review the script. And I'm very happy to work on a college campus. It's fewer of the issues with dealing with minors. I mean, we have some, but minors or parents, is that sometimes the single parent complaint can get the whole program put on pause or shut out. And the students need scenarios, right? They
need scenario. They need practice. They need to run through it.
Yeah.
And it's important that we don't under respond, and it's important that we also create healthy sex lives, allowing our young people to develop in healthy ways sexually.
I mean, I think this is one of my questions. I mean, really for both of you, and I encounter, and so without divulging much of the story, just because I have to encounter these things with work. I think I agree with. I mean, I'm also Gen X, and there was no guidance, right? And you kind of had to figure it out on your own, and I don't. And now we're in this place where there's a lot of awareness, but then sometimes I don't experience that there's room for making mistakes or exploring. Like you cross the boundary once, and then it's like now you're a predator, and that to me also feels hard for kids to be able to explore, because part of what you said, like part of it is like you don't know day to day, it can change, hormones are raging, and you're trying to figure out what the right boundaries are. And I never want anyone to be have their boundaries crossed at all. And how do we respond, or what do we do when that moment happens that also still allows the person who did the boundary crossing, as well as the person who had their boundary crossed, to be able to resolve this in a way that allows them both to continue on learning and growing without it becoming like now you're just this person over here, on either side. But it feels almost like we become instantly polarized when those moments happen in a way that didn't happen before. And I'm just curious about it.
There's the continuum. There's clearly sexual assault. That's sexual assault, and there isn't. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this gray area,
right?
Where it's much more complex, right? I think we can all say sexual assault is clearly wrong and it's violent, and someone says no, and we have to respect the no. And then there's these gray complexities of being human that I think your point, Cara, about making sure that we're giving scenarios and role plays and playing them out, because it's important that they're having the opportunity to kind of explore those complexities. And how does that look when you're doing it with young people?
So one good thing potentially is that the number of products available, like with this awareness, many people are trying to develop a curriculum, a tool, an app, whatever it is. some with very good intentions, and I'm a little nervous about implications or results, but I'll take this growing phase. I will. And we have definitely grown through we're evolving through the fear, as you've mentioned, because with all these headlines about like Title IX in schools, the federal law and lawsuits, and with increased scrutiny on organizations comes pressure for them to respond. Are we doing so fairly? But then also just outside of systems with the students in their peer groups, cancel culture is really, really harmful and divisive on our college campuses. And we're having these conversations about, is this accountability? Is this productive though? Because we're a college campus, we're in education. We want learning. We want that evolution. We want development. We want rehabilitation, right? And so for many people, addressing sexual violence is a social justice issue. And so we would like to incorporate aspects of restorative or transformative justice into the response, to also acknowledge that there's harm beyond the individual in many of these cases too. But we've applied the very American legal model of person versus person to some of our school systems. With increased awareness comes increased legal action, but it seems like it's getting increasingly legalistic, which has made it very divisive. So we're now in this intensely polarized, fear-based system. And I think if you talk to the prevention educators or the advocates, that's not where we want to be, right? It feels too intense. It makes it too high stakes. We actually are making it so high stakes, people are not engaging with the issue, with the material, with the system, you name it.
Right.
So when you look at the reports, and I'm always thinking about this because I'm trying to make use of the fear, where I'm like, okay, if they're coming in, and mostly it's male students and parents of male students who are talking to me about this, like their fear is really high. The fear of being accused is really, really high. It doesn't translate into, an actual report most of the time. People still underreport,
Right.
So I think the fear is way outpacing their reality of being accused of sexual misconduct, but they're coming in with all of this fear. So what do we do about that? So I'm trying to mobilize the fear into getting them into education programs. Like, okay, come learn, come practice, then be really clear that you have consent. If your fear is that high, assumptions, living in that gray area, that's not the safe situation. Then you have to clarify consent, because many of our policies and the laws don't always require a verbal yes or no. Most of them don't. Most of people are not working in a very clinical fashion up or down the body saying, I would like to touch your breast now. May I touch your breast? I mean, that's very clear, to each their own, but I don't hear that as their normal practice.
Right.
So what are the ways that we can work it in? And yeah, sometimes, they think that I'm too old to get it, right? I'm like their parents at this point. But, I try to have younger staff and to stay current on the lingo and whatever tools they're using, know what's going on, like different apps, incorporate those into the scenarios, not in a corny way. We don't want to make it so entertaining / amusing that they think we're being ridiculous. The more realistic, the more we treat them as young adults and present things based on the data about what we know they're experiencing, then they can't deny the applicability of the material, And then also, as appropriate and as resources and training are available, peer educators can be a great tool. I don't like that as the only tool, because sometimes that's a real budget-friendly way to do prevention education, but that does not giving you a comprehensive plan or oversight and evaluation, right? So it's a yes and all the above. Let's do all the things and try it from different tactics and talk to people so that they can see themselves in the situations that we're facing.
Yeah.
So how do young people get into your classes at college campuses? Like, how do they find their way to consent education?
Well, the good news I think it's good news. Not everyone does, but I think it's good news that a lot of it's required. Okay, so colleges have really adopted this, some minimal level, seems to be standard practice now. And so we're coming up to the start of the fall semester for many campuses. My calendar is very full of kind of my road show where I make lots of appearances. So did members of my team. And dosing is really key, right? So multiple doses. And a lot of programs, a lot of offices, units, majors, residence halls will have you once. They know it's important, definitely have you one time. The maneuvering and strategy for me and my team is to get invited back as many times as possible, right? To just keep building, keep reminding them. So what is likely to happen in the coming weeks is that many college students are required to complete an online module. A lot of times those are sent out to them before the start of the school year. And so this is probably sounding familiar to some parents. It is that time of year. I mean, I know ours is out. I was talking to some high school students and they're like, yes, we've gotten those. Parents, please do not do those for your students. We need the students to do them themselves.
Right.
Sometimes they tell on themselves and they fall. So we really do want this to be an initial piece. It's what we can send the child before they come to campus, right? It's the best we can do to introduce a topic. Then what we try to do is put, our institutional faces, offices, resources to that material in person during their on-campus orientation, if they're on a physical campus. We're starting with the consent definition because that has a sense of urgency, right? I don't know that they've gotten it before. They probably haven't. In the absence of this education in K through 12, believe me, they're getting misinformation elsewhere. That's what is so concerning to me. I know it's uncomfortable. I know it feels risky, but they are getting information from their friends, from problematic community members, from the internet. It's like sometimes there's some great tools out there, but if you don't know where your child is getting the information, I worry about that because I see them when they come into college. So we're trying to combat some of the assumptions that they might have made about what consent is and isn't, and be really clear that we do take it seriously. It is an expectation of how you interact with others. And then we begin immediately encouraging them to keep learning bystander intervention. So in whatever time I have, I'll give the consent definition and 5 bystander intervention strategies. But for good learning and comprehensive and skill building, I do need to see them multiple times. So and then we work with particularly the first year houses because my first year students and sophomore students face heightened risk. Really, it's 16 to 24-year-olds face heightened risk. And then when you break that down further, women face increased risk, disproportionately women of color, bisexual students, transgender students. So they're facing the highest risk. And so we want to reach everyone because this does cut across aspects of identity, but we also know what we know from the research and from the traffic, and want to speak to that when and where we need to. But anyone can be a bystander. And that's the great part of that piece of it is we're all bystanders, like it or not. Everyone has a role to play. And so we're trying to connect that to community care, community creeds, this sense of responsibility for bonding and contributing to the campus environment, to the residence hall. And so I'm working on those 2 fronts at the beginning of every school year.
Yeah, that's great. So something that everybody gets that's helpful, and then targeted interventions for groups that are particularly vulnerable to being assaulted and needing that support. I think that's also really powerful. This isn't the question that I thought I was going to ask, but it's the one that's on my mind, which is, do you also or do you recommend proactively working with groups that may be more likely to create situations where consent is needed? I'm thinking of fraternity parties or other places where there's, alcohol, lots of energy happening, and the possibility of people finding themselves in a compromising situation.
Yes, absolutely. We do. Many schools do. with I would say most of the fraternities and sororities nationwide that have a national headquarters, they know they're concerned about this. They know it comes in terms of risk, of liability, and it's usually a required component of their member education.
Okay.
So they will get something, probably from their national organization, um, but they are definitely getting a lot from the institution, at least in my case. So we work with our Greek life, our Greek chapters, on all aspects of this because they do have structural control of the social scene in many ways, geographic control, and this is such an interesting question because so many of the sororities still are not allowed to host parties. So the fraternities are the places that parties, they host the parties and they can host the parties and people would like to go to parties. And so the fraternities, young men.
I did not know that.
This is,
I've never been in a sorority.
It's very traditional. Yeah.
I had no idea. You can't have a party if you're a sorority. That is
some can, but it's rare, so this is a challenge for me. I would like to change this.
I'm having some feelings.
I am having feelings. I'm like choosing my words carefully. I'm like, I have feelings about this. It is not that I want to encourage more risky behavior, but I would like to address the gender divide and being able to control the space. Right. So I think that's an issue. And we know that it is. We know that it is because we know that membership in a Greek organization increases your risk and your risk of being accused of a violation. Okay. We know that alcohol consumption is often, not required, but often a regular part of that social scene. And that if you are a member or constantly around it, you're likely to consume more. And alcohol consumption, as it goes up, risk of sexual violence goes up, right? And all of these things make sense, but we're not quite addressing the issue because I need students to have more choices in where the party is.
Right.
I really do. I would like women to have more control over structuring the social activity. And I'm working with the fraternities themselves because me and others, it's not just me, but like many of us who would like to change some of these rules at the national level are getting resistance because of ideas of femininity and being ladylike and appropriate behavior, where they're just not budging on letting the women have alcohol in their residence or host a social event of any size. I think they can have small gatherings sometimes, but not the party. And so then who is hosting the party? 18 to 22-year-old men.
It just puts it in the context of where we are in terms of misogyny and the control over women's bodies, right? And it brings me back to what just happened on the Supreme Court with Roe v. Wade. It feels like there are that these ways in which our systems are set up to control the female body. And that this is just another example. And I'm still really, I don't know how I didn't know that, but because
a lot of people don't know that. Sometimes when I say that, people are like, I'm sorry, what? And just assume that changed somewhere along the way, but it hasn't. And even I am surprised at the resistance because I'm not the only person having this conversation. And I will say, to give credit, the students themselves, the women's students want this to change, and they are pushing their national organizations to make a lot of changes, and they're experiencing some resistance, either in the alums, donors, or the people who are running the national organization. They are not moving on this as quickly as we would like.
Well, I love what you mentioned there. Around the students starting to have some agency. And I'm at least in the Bay Area, I've encountered multiple different instances where students, particularly female identified students, but not exclusively, are demanding for greater consent education to happen in the schools. They're also demanding for the opportunity for them to be a part of leading those conversations, which I think is really exciting and really cool. And I wish they didn't have to, there wasn't that gap that they needed to advocate into. But when we're starting to work with kids that are wanting to advocate in that way, What are some ways to do it that are both helpful but also um, boundaries is the word that's coming up for me, but like also right sizing their role,
Yeah.
so that they
Mhm.
understand that they need to partner with adults, for example, and there are some rules that, and you have to be careful when how you know, like kind of make some of those lines. So you need to partner with the adults who know and understand some of that stuff, and also there are limits, and these kinds of changes take time. And so I love the enthusiasm, and I also sometimes struggle with like, and you can't create something on your own. And there's parents and rules and,
Right.
structures. And so how do we start to support kids as they're wanting
Yeah.
to take some ownership of that?
They they are really taking ownership of it, which is wonderful, which has really created a lot of the change. I mean, student activism
Mhm.
since about 2013, 14 contributed significantly. People in roles like mine, I mean, we were always doing what we could where we are with what we've got. That's what you do
Right.
when you choose this type of work. But they were really savvy, right? And they used the internet. They found each other,
Mhm.
and they like exposed a lot of injustice. And what's really apparent is a lot of times these offices who are trying to do the work or professionals in K through 12 schools might be one person, often
Hmm.
an overworked, underpaid person,
Right.
Mhm.
or a person lower in the hierarchy and therefore is a vulnerable position for
Mhm.
advocating for change.
Right.
Um, like currently where I work, we have a full-time staff of 6, and that's considered very large,
Mhm.
and unheard of. And I mean, I cannot complain because if I look across the field, or you do a per student ratio, this is a very well resourced office. Um, and we're at a place, though, as schools where doing more is considered good enough, even if that more remains woefully insufficient, right?
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
So the students, I think, are having valid feelings about their uh, inadequate sex ed. I mean,
Hmm.
Mhm.
echo that. And based on bad situations, they've lost trust in the adults.
Yeah.
And so we've got to rebuild that. That's the key, right? So students work with my office because we came in deliberately trust building. And it doesn't have to be everyone, and it doesn't have to be the institution, and it probably won't be the overall
Mhm.
institution.
Hmm.
And you've got to just live with that. That's okay. That's
Hmm.
okay. But start with who they trust, um, who can have, and I do sometimes have some like tough love conversations with them because um, in the work, we're often um, approached by students who maybe become overnight activists, right? Like they've been
Mhm.
really impacted and motivated by their own experience or something they've witnessed, and you know, they want to voice how wrong it is and create change overnight.
Hmm.
And listen, I want change overnight. I do. And I think the anger is valid and the outrage is valid, right? These things are wrong and shouldn't be happening.
Hmm.
My challenge there is often they can think their way is the highway or their experience is the
Mhm.
universal experience.
Mhm.
We all need to speak out and acknowledge our experiences, and the burden is on survivors to say this happened to me. So,
Right.
Or
why?
that the struggle started the day they got involved,
Yes,
and
Right.
yes,
like
right.
all this
So,
work hasn't been done.
Right.
Which is
yes,
developmentally right where they appropriate. They're
sure,
at this developmental
yes,
phase, and we want to fuel this excitement and passion to
yeah,
be an activist.
yeah,
And we need to help them recognize, like, sort of what all the things are that
yes.
are already happening or in the works and how to plug into that.
Right.
My approach is really yes and, where I like try to
Mhm.
match the enthusiasm, like yes, you're right, you
Mhm.
know, and um, here's this book or this website or here's what we can do. So really our approach to working with students is I want to say yes to something that they're coming and asking to do,
Mhm.
but I do not say yes to all of it. Like it really depends. And so a lot of times it's like, well, have you thought about how this, because if we want to do something really provocative on a main part of campus, then every student has to walk by that, right? So like,
Mhm.
is that where it has to be? How are we going to communicate that? So walking them through things while knowing that they still have support and knowing that there are people fully committed to addressing
Mhm.
the issue, kind of in an unapologetic way,
Mhm.
has been how we navigate that. Sometimes I point them to a class. I think that's a good way to direct energy. So I'm like, have you looked at the gender
Mm-hmm.
studies? Like I think there's different ways to channel the energy around this. And the thing with students is they are students, so they have
Right.
school. So sometimes the energy dissipates, but they do like come out real strong, ready to uh, slay the dragon. And we need that. I
We
think it takes
do.
all
We
of us.
definitely do.
I need the protests. I need accomplices. I need co-conspirators. I need allies.
Right, right, right.
You need people. You need whistleblowers. You need the canary in the
Mhm.
coal mine. I mean, I'll take all of the above. Um, but if they trust you, then they will let you channel it in a certain route. And trust is real low right now.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it is low.
For
I
good
love the yeah.
reason.
For
Good
good
reason.
reason. I love
Mhm.
the yes and response because I think that is, I think, and I am guilty often of like, someone comes up to me and the wheels are turning on like
I
all
know.
the no's. I'm like, oh shoot, you're hitting this wall and then you're gonna hit this one. And so learning to do the yes and I think is really powerful and something I've been playing with. And you're right, trust is in an all-time low, as well it should be, given how things have been going in our country, especially for folks who have identify as women and our transgender and LGBTQ plus community, and of course, folks that identify as among the global majority. So we got a lot of people that are feeling very justifiably at risk in this moment in time and unsafe in general. So knowing how to come forward. Um, yeah, I keep thinking about the example as we're getting close-ish to the end of the show. I mean, part of what I'm hearing is we start really young with helping people to know
Mhm.
what their boundaries are. And I have my son has half sisters that are now 4, going to be 4 in a minute. And I do it with them all the time. I did it with my son too. It's just the example of like when I see them, if they don't want to see me, then I'm like, cool, you do you. That's your boundary. You're safe. And then whenever I leave, I let them pick how I say goodbye. To your point, especially, I think for young girls, it's important that they know that they have agency over their body from a very young age. And I think we've mostly moved away from making kids give kisses and hugs, although I do see
Mhm.
it still. But I let them pick. I'm like, okay, here's a range of 4 options. Which one do you want, or you could have something else? And then they get to choose, and then they always feel so much happier about it.
Mhm.
And I still do it with my son to this day. He's 13 now, and he controls the show. I might want
Mhm.
to give him a hug and run up and tell him how much I love him, but if that's not the moment, then I'm like, okay, cool. So I think for both male and female, and non-binary and folks, naming that you get to say what you want with your body at any given
Mhm.
time, I think is really important. And the adults around us, one of the most important things we can do is honor that, because the second we cross that boundary, um, and do it consistently, we're taking away agency, but we're also modeling
Yes.
some really powerful
Mhm.
negative approaches to addressing consent and all of that. Um, yeah, so I wanted to make sure I put a plug in for that. And then, as you said, as we get older, it can start to get into sexuality, but really in the younger ages, it is just about boundaries. I love that
Mhm.
you named even things, stuff, and things, that it's not just your personal body, but it's also your possessions, that you have a right to have some space over that.
There's some great kids books that we use or that read about body boundaries and videos and stuff that really help kids get developmentally appropriate language. Sesame Street has put out some, and of course I love Sesame Street.
Mhm.
They put out some great videos around body boundaries, and I have a couple books that
Can you put the titles in the show in Facebook there? Can
yeah,
you
yeah.
just put them there? Yeah, that'd be
I'll
great.
add I'll put them in.
Yeah, that'd be great. That's awesome. And then as you get older, as you were saying, then we do start to have those conversations around sexuality
Mhm.
and consent. Um, I guess what we haven't gotten to yet, and I'd love to ask. So there's the sexual consent. You find yourself in a situation where suddenly you're in this boundary space, and your boundaries are being crossed. I do think it's additionally complex. If you are realizing at the same time that you might be trans, or
Mhm.
you might
Yeah.
um, be and LGBTQ. So
Mhm.
how do we also provide support for, so there's the general support for all students that are that we need to understand around sexual consent and saying no and respecting that no.
Mhm.
And then how do we support students that are LGBTQ plus who might be dealing with additional layers
Yeah.
in the same time?
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And actually was thinking of this earlier, but didn't go there. So I love this. Um, a lot of the products that are available, like when they're trying to sell you a curriculum, they are very heterosexist,
Mhm.
and like um, just use names like John and Susan, and often pose the like frat party example. Okay.
Right.
So a lot of the education, if you just take it off the shelf, like is speaking to a very narrow student experience, right? That is not
Mhm.
inclusive. That
Mhm.
is not reflective of who's on our campus. Okay. I mean,
Right.
we have international students. We have many, many students who do not participate in Greek life, many students who do not Greek, who do not drink.
Mm.
Um, and so I think if colleges where they're doing the most of the prevention education are taking the easy way out or just not
Mhm.
being thoughtful about this, we're just perpetuating problems, right? We're
Right.
not meeting them.
Right.
And many schools are guilty of this.
Mm.
So I hope that like you look at the names in your scenarios, you look at the body images, photographs, silhouettes, whatever it is in your scenarios, change them. This is so
Mhm.
easy. Just
Mhm.
change the names. They don't all have to be for a while then everyone was doing like Pat, like a name that could, you just need variety, right?
Right.
Different
Right.
students need to
Mhm.
be able to see themselves at different parts of a training to feel like it's
Mhm.
for them. Then you need to mention different types of sexual activity. So you can't focus narrowly on penetrative sex. It needs to talk about a range of behaviors
Mhm.
and normalize a range of behaviors. And presenters, you've got to be comfortable with this. You
Yeah.
can't be stumbling over the letters. It can't be the add-on that you throw into the message,
Mm.
and it's
Mm.
not always John and Susan. You can't
Right.
do that, right? Because then
Right.
everyone knows that where your focus lies. And
Mhm.
so you do have to overhaul your messaging to be inclusive from the get-go. We're not just adding things on at the end. So we collaborate with our like Office of LGBTQI Life on campus, but it has to start early. You have
Yeah, and
to
I would say right now, young
you know.
people are the young people I know, and we're in the Bay Area, so
Yeah,
it may not be completely representative of the
yeah,
country, but my daughter's going to be a senior. My son just graduated, and I would say the majority of their friends do not identify as binary or as
yeah,
that that they have a much more fluid understanding of gender. And
oh, yeah,
at this point, and I think they're figuring it out in a way that it's kind of great that our generation didn't have. But
yeah,
if you're putting just these very heteronormative scenarios,
yeah,
young people are going to dismiss you immediately. Yeah, outright, they're not
yeah,
going to, they're going to assume you don't really understand who they are and what their
yeah.
Right.
experience is.
And
Yeah.
you don't and you really don't get too many chances. You got to get it right on the first. I mean,
Mhm.
if I get orientation wrong, they discount my office the whole time they're here. You
Mhm.
know,
Right. Right.
so also get out of your own way, adults, right? Like I don't have to present every time. It doesn't have to be, the like
Yeah.
44-year-old white lady like presenting. I don't have to be the star of the show. You put the most persuasive presenter in the room. You
Mhm.
ensure that there is diversity, inclusion and belonging in your program, and then it will come out in your messaging. So,
Absolutely.
like the you have to have a diverse staff. If you don't, you have to include, others to review any curriculum.
Mhm.
You have to have a true collaboration with the office, also providing those resources. You
Mhm.
have to know your limits. And if you can't speak to or support a student because of some aspect of their experience or identity, you have to help them find the resource who can. So
Mhm.
a lot of times I think people make it about them, their panicked response, and it just becomes a really incomplete picture and uh, space or office of support. It can't be, about me, even though I lead this office. Well, that serves some people well, but not everyone, right? And
Right.
Mhm.
so,
Right.
um, in this respect, you have to mean what you say. Like you have to show their experience, their faces, their bodies, their identities in your materials so that they know that you see them and are also, informed and non-judgmental, um, very culturally aware, and
Mhm.
sensitive, and also just willing to connect them with other resources if something's
Mhm.
missing from the office that you have, which may not be your fault. I know this is all woefully under resourced, right? But you've
Mhm.
got to make those connections in your communities where you can.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful point. I mean, my son and his friends, they are, as Susan said, and this might be a very much of a California, San Francisco East Bay kind of situation. Um, but yeah, the kids are just so much farther along than
Yeah.
we
Mhm.
are. Frankly, in everything. I was just a principal for a semester at a high school, and I was like, oh my word, like the way that kids learn is so different than the way that we learn. The way that they interact with the
Mhm.
world is so
Mhm.
different. We can very easily be out of touch and be out of pace with how they're orienting. And in something, as you said, I think that's such an important point, Kara, that you have one chance really to build that trust, especially around an issue like this.
Yeah.
That if you miss it because you're so stuck in your way of doing
Mhm.
things or your kind of worldview, then you might actually be undermining your own efforts to provide the
Mhm.
support that you so badly want to provide. And there are folks that are more than happy to support you, and then you support them.
Yeah.
Right.
And that collaboration is so important, so powerful.
I think we forgot our commercial,
Oh, right.
and I think we are out of time.
I
So,
think we are out of time.
good.
Kara,
I
we
think
could
it was
talk to
such
you
an
more.
engrossing
That was
conversation.
great.
It was such a great conversation. We never went for a commercial break,
Yeah,
obviously there's so much more to talk
Yeah.
about. This is such an
yeah.
important topic, and I'm grateful that we're having it, and I'm hoping that it continues to evolve.
Mhm.
I know the district that I have worked in the last number of years, I've been really proud of the work that our team has
Yeah.
done around boundary education, safe touch education, and consent for older kids. And
Mhm.
it's still under resourced and it's still not enough. And I think, as you
Right.
said, the adults need to be comfortable having the conversations
Mhm.
if we're really going to do some,
Yeah.
and having the complex gray conversation so
Yeah.
that we can give them useful information that's going to help them navigate and create healthy sex lives.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
such a great, rich conversation. There's so much more to go. How can folks find you if they're interested in learning more, or if they want their institution or university to be able to access your services?
Sure. Um, as I mentioned, I'm on the board of Stop Sexual Assault in Schools, and that's a great resource that's provides lots of free tools, lots of contacts, lots of support. So whether you're looking for education or support for like a specific incident, that's ssais.org. So that's Stop Sexual Assault in Schools. All of that is free.
What is it?
Um,
SS.
AIS.org. And that, reach out to anyone there. They'll respond immediately. Yes, thank you. I
Mhm.
also, we didn't talk about it, but recommend like empowerment self-defense, because I have a lot of parents ask me like, should my child be in self-defense? And I'm like, well, yes, maybe. Um, the one I would recommend, which is feminist informed, trauma informed, like culturally responsive, is called empowerment self-defense. And
Mhm.
that is a type. So there are different providers nationwide. Locally, we work with Assert Empowerment Self Defense, and you can learn more about that because they talk about what they are at youcanbeassertive.org. And then you can find me a variety of places. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram. Yeah, I've written a book on assertiveness, and everything is Cara Tuttle Bell or at Cara Tuttle Bell. So it's all in alignment. You should be able to find me if you can get my name. And I'm happy to talk about people because this is, chosen work and a passion project for me. But I
Yeah,
had a
thank
great
you for that.
conversation. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I thank you. I mean, I'm a martial artist, and I got into martial art because of actually via a kind of a self-defense course that I found was terrifying, actually. So
Yes, yes, some
I
of them are.
appreciate what you're naming. Some of them are, I think, are absolutely re-traumatizing. So I appreciate you naming
Mhm.
those resources and how important it is that we actually can learn how to take care of ourselves. I'll put a plug in for Aikido, which is the martial art I do, since that's a nonviolent martial art, which also can feel safer. But yeah, there's just finding ways that you can feel empowered in your body. I think is also can be really helpful. Not for everyone, but yeah, Kara, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us on the show, for the work that you do, and the services you're providing to students. I cannot imagine how many students you've really served and supported,
Mhm.
and what a important what an important act for the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.